She placed the divorce papers on the bed of a woman who could barely breathe. Didn't knock. Didn't hesitate. Just walked in at 3 in the morning, like she owned the room, because in her mind, she owned everything, including her son's choices, his future, and the woman lying broken in that hospital bed. Yoonji Kwon set the leather folder down beside Zariah's hand. Didn't say a word at first. Just let the weight of it sit there. Like a verdict. And Zariah, 24 years old, fractured rib, a bruise the color of a storm cloud still spreading across her temple, opened her eyes slowly and looked at the woman who had spent 3 years trying to erase her. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She smiled. That smile is where this story really begins. If you've ever loved someone whose family made you feel like you were never enough, stay with me. Because what happened in that hospital room at 3A, M will make you question everything you think you know about loyalty, power, and the kind of love that survives betrayal. Hit that subscribe button right now and follow this story all the way to the end, because I promise you, what's coming will leave you speechless. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning. 11 days before that hospital room confrontation, Zariah Monroe was driving home on the I-90 just past midnight, her mind already half asleep, thinking about the leftover jerk chicken she'd been looking forward to all day. Small thought, normal thought, the kind of thought a person has when they believe their biggest problem is being tired. She never saw the second car coming. It didn't hit her from the side. It didn't rear-end her. It eased up alongside her in the dark, just close enough, just steady enough, and then it nudged her once, twice. Subtle as a whisper until her grip on the wheel stopped mattering, and the guardrail came up so fast she didn't even have time to scream. The car went through the barrier. She remembers the sound of metal. She remembers her head hitting something. She remembers the strange, terrible stillness afterward, and the way the rain smelled like iron. She does not remember who pulled her out. What she does remember, what she has thought about every single day since waking up in that hospital bed, is that the car that nudged her off the road didn't stop, didn't slow down, didn't even tap its brakes. Whoever was driving already knew she wouldn't need help. They expected her to be dead. The doctors called it a miracle. Her attending physician, a tired man named Dr. Osi, who looked like he hadn't slept properly since 2019, sat beside her bed on day 2 and told her that the angle of impact was almost perfectly wrong for survival. A few degrees different in any direction, and the conversation they were having wouldn't be happening. Zariah listened to all of it with the same expression she wore. Through most difficult things, quiet, composed, eyes tracking every word like she was filing it away somewhere important. Almost perfectly wrong, she repeated back to him. He nodded. She didn't say anything else, but her hands, hidden beneath the hospital blanket, curled into fists. Because she understood what almost perfectly wrong meant when you translated it out of medical language. It meant someone had planned this. Someone had calculated the angle, the speed, the moment, and they had gotten it almost right. Almost. Her husband didn't come to the hospital the first night. Or the second. That detail, that specific, brutal detail, is the thing that breaks people when they hear this story. Not the crash. Not the conspiracy. The fact that Jae-sung Kwon, the man she had married, the man she had chosen, over the easier life she could have had, wasn't there when she opened her eyes. People were there, 3 of them, stationed outside the door in shifts, suits pressed even at 4A. M, faces like carved stone. They brought flowers she didn't ask for, and a phone she didn't want, and messages from Jae-sung that said things like resting now, I'll be there soon, and the doctors say you're stable, that's what matters. That's what matters. Zariah read that message 4 times. She set the phone face down on the tray table and stared at the ceiling for a long time. She had known, when she married Jae-sung, what she was walking into. She wasn't naive. She wasn't a woman who stumbled into a dangerous world and didn't understand the terrain. She had walked in with her eyes open, had learned the language of it, the silences, the codes, the way men in his world used absence as a form of control. She had thought she understood all the ways power could wound a person. She had not anticipated this particular wound. 3 days in, she stopped expecting him to walk through the door. She started working instead. Her phone was her only real tool, and her tools were limited. But Zariah had spent the last 3 years learning, slowly and quietly, how the architecture of the Kwan organization worked. Not because anyone had taught her, they hadn't. They had very deliberately kept her at a distance from everything that mattered. But Zariah had a kind of attention that was almost uncomfortable to be around. She noticed things. She remembered things. She connected things that other people assumed had nothing to do with each other. She had a friend named Tamsin, not in the organization, not connected to any of it, just a woman she had known since college who happened to work in telecommunications compliance. Tamsin owed her a favor that had nothing to do with any of this. Zariah called it in. "I need phone records," she told Tamsin on day 4. 3 numbers, going back 6 weeks. "Zariah, I know what I'm asking." Pause. "Are you in trouble?" She looked at the bruise on her arm, yellow and green now at the edges, healing in its ugly way. "I'm already in it," she said. "I just need to know how deep." The records came through on day 6. She spent 14 hours reading them. By the morning of day 7, she had a name. The name wasn't Dae-hyun's. Not directly. It never is with men like him. The name she found was a logistics coordinator, a man called Bertrand, who moved things, arranged things, made complicated problems disappear for people who could pay for that kind of service. His number appeared 7 times in the 6 weeks before the crash, in the call log of someone who worked inside the Kwan organization's outer circle. 7 times. The last call was 40 minutes before her car went over the barrier. Zariah sat with that number for a long time. She turned it over in her mind, the way you turn a stone over in your hand, looking at what lives underneath it. She thought about the people Bertrand reported to. She thought about who in the organization had the access, the motive, and most importantly, the specific kind of ambition that makes a person capable of arranging the death of a woman whose only crime was being loved by the wrong man. She thought about Dae-hyun Kwan, 29 years old, brilliant in the shallow, showy way of men who have never truly been tested. She had watched him for 3 years, at family dinners and organization events, always positioned just slightly too close to the center, always laughing a half-second too late, always watching Jae Shi-young with eyes that hid what they were feeling. Almost. She had never said anything because saying something required proof, and proving things about powerful men requires either someone who loves you enough to help or evidence cold enough to stand on its own. By day 9, she had both. The someone who helped her wasn't who you'd expect. His name was Marcus, and he had worked for Dae-hyun for 2 years running security at one of the organization's legitimate front businesses, a real estate holding company with offices on Michigan Avenue. Marcus was unremarkable in every way that Dae-hyun valued, which meant Dae-hyun had stopped really seeing him years ago. People like Dae-hyun always make that mistake. They stop seeing the people who move quietly through their worlds, and those people see everything. Marcus had a daughter 7 years old. He had a wife who worked double shifts at a hospital on the South Side. He was not, in any meaningful sense, a good man. He had done things in service to the Kwan organization that kept him awake sometimes. But he was a man who had a line, and watching Bertrand walk in and out of the back office over 6 consecutive nights, while Dae-hyun burned documents, was enough to show him where that line was. He reached out to Zariah through a channel, so indirect, it took her half a day to understand how the message had arrived. What he sent her was not a recording, not a document. It was 7 photographs taken with a personal cell phone, blurry in the way photographs taken in secret always are, but clear enough to show Dae-hyun's handwriting on a ledger that no auditor had ever seen. Clear enough to show Bertrand's face, clear enough to show the date stamps, which aligned almost perfectly with the timeline Zariah had already constructed. She held the phone and looked at those photographs for a very long time. She thought about crying. She genuinely considered it. But there was something beneath the grief and the fury that was colder and harder than either, and it was telling her that crying could wait. The clock, in a sense, had already started. On the evening of day 10, a man named Elias, who handled certain kinds of external communications for Jae Seong, and who had, over 3 years, developed a quiet respect for Zariah that he would never have admitted out loud, came to her hospital room with a bag of food she hadn't ordered and a look on his face that told her he was carrying something heavier than takeout containers. He set the food down, looked at the door, looked back at her. "There are going to be visitors tomorrow night," he said. Zariah waited. "You should know about them before they arrive." He didn't tell her who was coming. He didn't say names. But what he told her, the shape of it, the outline was enough. Someone was coming with papers. Someone was coming with threats. Someone was coming to finish, through pressure and intimidation, what a highway barrier had failed to accomplish. When he left, Zariah sat in the dark for a long time. Then she made 3 phone calls. The first was to Tamsin. The second was to Marcus. The third was to a lawyer. She trusted not the Kwan family lawyer, not anyone connected to any of it, but a woman she had met at a fundraiser 2 years ago who had the particular kind of reputation that made other lawyers uncomfortable to be in the same room with her. By midnight, the evidence Zariah had assembled over 10 days of recovery was in the hands of someone outside Chicago, outside the reach of anything Dae-yoon could dispatch before morning, with instructions. If Zariah did not send a specific message before 4 everything went forward automatically to people who would know exactly what to do with it. She set an alarm, not to send the message, but to remind herself how much time was left. Then she folded her hands on top of the hospital blanket, closed her eyes, and waited. She was still awake when the door opened at 3 a.m. She had been awake for hours, actually, but she kept her breathing slow and her eyes shut just a moment longer than necessary when she heard footsteps entering the room. She needed to know who it was before she let them know she was awake. She needed that half-second of information. She recognized Yoonji's perfume first. Expensive, floral, the kind that announces itself before the woman wearing it does. She had always thought that was intentional with Yoonji. Everything about that woman was announcement. She heard the leather folder placed on her tray table. She heard a second set of footsteps, heavier, with a particular rhythm of someone trying to look casual when they weren't. Dae-hyun, and a third measured, professional. Marissa Crane, the family attorney. Zariah had met her twice. She was the kind of lawyer who was very good at her job and had made peace with what that job required. 3 of them, in her hospital room, at 3 a.m. And behind the curtain that separated her bed from the small seating area near the window, though Zariah did not know this yet, though this piece of the night would not become clear to her for another 17 minutes, a 4th person. Zariah opened her eyes. She looked at her mother-in-law. She looked at the leather folder. She looked at Dae-hyun, who was already watching her with the bright, hollow eyes of someone who believes they've already won. "You should have stayed asleep," Yoonji said quietly. Zariah sat up slowly because her ribs still pulled with every movement, because her body was still paying the price for what this woman's son had arranged, and she looked Yoonji Kwan directly in the face. "I've been waiting for you," she said. The room went very still. And somewhere behind that curtain, a man who had built his entire life on the belief that he could control what happened to the people he loved went cold in a way he had never felt before. Because he finally understood. His wife wasn't the one who needed protecting. He was standing in her hospital room at 3 a.m., and she had already built the trap they were all standing in. The silence that followed Zariah's words lasted maybe 4 seconds. 4 seconds doesn't sound like much, but in a hospital room at 3 a.m. with a fractured rib and a bruise that still hadn't finished turning all its colors, with 3 people standing over your bed who had come specifically to bury you, 4 seconds is long enough to change the temperature of an entire room. Yoonji was the first to recover. That was the thing about her. She was not a woman who stayed off balance for long. She had survived too much, controlled too much, buried too many inconvenient truths beneath too many expensive arrangements to be genuinely rattled by a 24-year-old in a hospital gown. She pulled the chair beside the bed toward herself, sat down with the particular precision of someone who makes every physical movement a statement, and folded her hands in her lap. "Waiting," she repeated. The word came out flat, with the faint accent that surfaced sometimes at the edges of her English, more pronounced when she was working hard to contain something. That's an interesting way to describe lying in a hospital bed for 11 days. I wasn't just lying here, Zariah said. No. Yoonji's eyes moved to the phone on the tray table, then back to Zariah's face. I suppose you weren't. Dae-hyun hadn't moved from near the door. He was standing with his arms crossed, weight shifted slightly back, the posture of a man who wants to project that he could leave at any moment and simply hasn't chosen to yet. Zariah had seen him use that posture at family dinners when conversations made him uncomfortable. She had always thought it looked like a child pretending to be unafraid of the dark. It looked the same now. Marissa Crane had positioned herself slightly apart from both of them, nearer to the window, the leather folder tucked under one arm. She was watching Zariah with an expression that was professionally neutral, but not quite empty. There was something moving behind it, some calculation that hadn't finished running yet. Zariah looked at her directly. Miss Crane, I hope they're paying you very well for this particular visit. Marissa didn't answer. She didn't look away either. Let's not make this uglier than it has to be, Yoonji said. She reached forward and opened the leather folder herself, turning it so the document inside faced Zariah. These papers are straightforward, clean, generous, actually more than you would receive through any contested process. She paused. You sign, we transfer the funds within 72 hours, and you go back to whatever your life was before my son found you. Zariah looked at the papers. She read the first paragraph with the unhurried attention of someone who is not afraid of what they're reading. Then she looked back up. You drove here at 3 a.m, she said. For this, we came when we knew you'd be alone. And if I'd been asleep, we would have waited. Yoonji's voice didn't change at all. That was the part that was meant to frighten, not the words, but the absolute absence of discomfort in them. We have time. Zariah nodded slowly, like she was filing that away. Right, Dae-hyun pushed off the doorframe. He didn't walk toward the bed, not yet, but he moved into the room properly, and the shift in his position changed something in the air. He was done performing casual. You're treating this like a negotiation, he said. His voice was lower than his mother's, and rougher, stripped of the social polish he usually wore. It's not a negotiation. It's a deadline. Zariah looked at him. The doctors here know you, he continued. The staff. People who wheel you to your tests and bring your meals. They see things. They talk to people. Accidents in hospitals. He stopped. Let the pause do its work. They happen more than you'd think. The room temperature dropped another degree. Zariah held his gaze without blinking. Her hands, resting on top of the blanket, were completely still. Later, she would think about how hard she had worked to keep them still. Later, she would think about the specific sound of her own heartbeat in her ears during that silence. But in the moment, she gave him nothing. Dae-hyun, Yoonji said quietly. A warning. One word. He ignored it. He was past the point of taking direction. You should have died on that highway. That was supposed to be the end of it. The words came out with a kind of frustrated bluntness, like he was tired of being indirect about something that should have already been finished. Instead, you've been lying here for 11 days, and I want to know what you've been doing. Recovering, Zariah said. Obviously. Don't. He took one step closer to the bed. Don't do that. You're not stupid, so stop performing stupid. I know you've been making calls. I know people have been coming to see you who shouldn't have access to this floor. Whatever you think you've built in the last 11 days. Whatever I've built, Zariah said, and her voice was very quiet and very even, is already somewhere you can't reach it. The silence that came after that sentence was different from the one before. This one had weight to it. This one pressed down. Dae-hyun stared at her. Something behind his eyes shifted, not fear exactly, not yet, but the first small movement of a man who is beginning to suspect that the ground he's standing on is not as solid as he measured it. Marissa Crane moved slightly near the window, the leather folder adjusted under her arm. Yoonji was very still. Explain that, Dae-hyun said. I'd rather show you. Zariah reached for her phone on the tray table slowly, deliberately, telegraphing every movement so no one in the room could mistake it for anything sudden, and she unlocked it and turned the screen so Dayan could see it without having to come closer. He came closer anyway. He looked at the screen. The blood left his face in a way that was visible even in the low light of the hospital room. Not all at once, it was a slow process, like watching something drain. He looked at the image for a long time. Then he looked at the next one. Then the next. 7 photographs. He recognized the ledger. He recognized the handwriting. He recognized the date stamps, and in recognizing them, he understood immediately what they proved, and exactly how bad that was. "Where did you get these?" he said. Not a question. More like something crawling out of him involuntarily. "That's not the important part," Zariah said. "The important part is that I got them, and copies of them, along with phone records, timeline documentation, and a recorded statement from someone you trust or trusted, I suppose are currently sitting with a person in a city I won't name. And if I don't send a specific message before 4 a.m., that person has instructions to deliver everything to 3 separate recipients who will know exactly what to do with it." She let that land. Then she looked at the clock on her phone before she set it back on the tray table. "It's 3:17, she said. "You have 43 minutes. Dae-hyun straightened slowly. The muscle in his jaw was working. She could see it from where she was lying. "You're bluffing," he said. "Maybe," Zariah said. "Do you want to test that?" The question sat in the room like something physical. Yoon-ji stood up. She moved between her son and the bed with the quiet authority of a woman who has been managing catastrophes her entire adult life, and she looked at Zariah with an expression that had shifted completely. Gone was the composed, surgical coldness of the woman who had placed divorce papers on the tray table. What replaced it was something Zariah had never seen on Yoon-ji Kwan's face before. Respect. Small, tight, reluctant, but real. "All right," Yoon-ji said quietly. "All right." She was not speaking to Zariah. She was speaking to herself or to some internal calculation she was running. Then she pulled her chair closer and sat back down, and she leaned forward slightly, and she looked at Zariah the way she might look at a business problem that required a different kind of solution than she'd originally planned. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for," she said. "Everyone says that," Zariah replied, "and then they make the same mistake again." Something flickered across Yoon-ji's face. Not quite amusement. More like recognition. "Fair," she said. And then, without preamble, without any of the cushioning language that usually preceded this kind of conversation, "What do you want?" "Nothing you're offering. I haven't offered you anything yet." "Not really." She glanced briefly at the divorce papers, then back. "That," she gestured toward the folder, "that was the opening position. People who negotiate always leave room to move. I left room." She paused. "So, tell me what you actually want, and let's find out if there's a real conversation to be had here." Zariah studied her for a moment. She thought about all the Sunday dinners, all the events she had attended at the side of a man whose family looked through her like she was furniture. She thought about the specific texture of 3 years of being managed, handled, minimized by this woman, by this family, by the entire architecture of a world that had decided before she walked into it that she didn't belong. "I want my husband," she said finally. "I want the marriage I have. I want the people responsible for what happened to me on that highway to face what they did. And I want to never have this conversation again." Yoon-ji absorbed that. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture, a subtle tightening, barely visible. "Jae-seong is not something I can give you or take from you. He makes his own choices. Then why are you here? Because his choices have consequences for people beyond himself. For a family. For a legacy that was built over generations." "That's not what I asked." Zariah's voice sharpened slightly. "Just slightly enough to cut. I asked why you're here. At 3 a.m, with papers and threats, and your son standing by the door. If Jae-seong makes his own choices, then this conversation is pointless." "So which is it?" Yoon-ji looked at her, a long measuring look. "You would have been something extraordinary," she said softly, "in a different life." "This is my life," Zariah said, "and I'm going to keep it." The pause that followed felt like the last moment before something breaks. "Dae-hyun," who had been standing very still during his mother's attempt at negotiation, made a sound that was almost a laugh. It wasn't a good sound. It had the quality of something fraying. He moved abruptly, crossing the room toward the tray table, and Zariah understood immediately what he was moving toward her phone, the clock, the message she hadn't sent yet, and she moved to pull it back, but she was slower, because 11 days of her body knitting itself back together, because... "Don't," said a voice from the darkness near the curtain. One word, the room froze, not because the word was loud. It wasn't. It was quiet in a way that was almost worse than shouting the quiet of someone who has never needed to raise his voice to make a room obey. Everyone turned. The curtain moved. Jae-seong Kwon stepped out of the shadow of the seating area near the window, and the light from the monitors caught his face. And what was on his face was something that none of the three people in that room, not his mother, not his brother, not the lawyer, had ever seen there before. He had been back there since before they arrived. He had heard everything. Every word, every threat, every calculated pause. The photographs described aloud. The 43 minutes on the clock, his brother's voice, explaining that the crash was supposed to have been the end of it. He had heard all of it. Yoon-ji's color drained, not gradually, the way Dae-hyun's had all at once, in a single moment, like something had been pulled from beneath her. Dae-hyun's hand was still half extended toward the tray table. He didn't complete the movement. He didn't pull back either. He simply stopped, like someone had hit a pause in a recording. Marissa Crane took one quiet, controlled step backward toward the wall. Jae-seong looked at his brother first. He held that look for what felt like a very long time. Dae-hyun met it for about 4 seconds before his eyes dropped. The hand came back to his side. Then Jae-seong looked at his mother. Yoon-ji did not look away. She was the only one in the room who held his gaze directly, and Zariah, watching all of it from the bed, understood that this was the longest-running confrontation in the room, not Zariah against the family, not Dae-hyun against consequence, but a mother and her son standing on opposite sides of something that had cracked open tonight and would never fully close. "How long?" Yoon-ji said, not hysterical, not pleading. Just a question, in a voice that had gone very flat. "Long enough," Jae-seong said. She nodded once, a small nod. Like she was confirming something she'd suspected. Jae-hyun started. "Don't say my name." The words came out at the same volume as everything else. Quiet. Absolute. "Don't say anything until I tell you to." Dae-hyun's mouth closed. Jae-seong crossed the room not quickly, not with the dramatic stride of someone performing authority, but with the particular deliberateness of a man who is choosing every step carefully because he does not trust what he will do if he moves without thinking. Stopped beside the bed. He did not look at Zariah immediately. He looked at the divorce papers still sitting open on the tray table. He picked them up, held them for a moment. Then he set them back down, face down in a gesture that was so controlled. It was almost frightening. Then he looked at his wife. Zariah was watching him, with the same steady eyes she'd been wearing all night. And something in that steadiness, the fact that she wasn't reaching for him, wasn't breaking, wasn't asking him to fix anything, did something to him that he couldn't have named precisely. It moved through him and settled somewhere he wasn't ready to examine. "Are you all right?" he said. She held his gaze. "I've been better." He nodded. His jaw was tight. She could see the effort it was taking him to be in this room and not do something irreversible. He turned back to face the three people standing on the other side of the bed. Marissa Crane spoke first quietly. "Professionally, Jae-seong, I want to be clear that my involvement tonight was strictly legal counsel's." "Leave the folder," he said. "And leave." She looked at him for a moment. Then she set the folder on the chair Yoon-ji had vacated, and she left. The door opened and closed with a soft, careful click that felt enormously loud in the room. 3 people remained. Jae-seong looked at his brother. Dae-hyun was doing something with his expression that Zariah recognized, trying to build a defense out of composure, trying to arrange his face into something that looked like a man who had explanations, rather than a man who had been caught. She had seen it at dinner tables. She had seen it in conference rooms. She had thought it was simply how Dae-hyun moved through the world. She understood now that it was something else. It was the face of a man who had been calculating since he was old enough to understand what the family name was worth, and who had looked at his older brother's life and decided that patience was taking too long. "You want to tell me," Jae-seong said to him, "what the crash on the I-90 was?" Dae-hyun said nothing. "I'll tell you what I think it was," Jae-seong continued. "I think you looked at my wife and you saw a problem. You saw someone who had more of my attention than you thought she deserved, and more access to my trust than you were comfortable with. And you decided." "He stopped," breathed, continued. "You decided that removing her was the cleaner option." I'm not finished. Not louder. Just final. "I've been running my own investigation for 11 days. Independently of whatever Zariah built." He glanced toward the bed briefly, and something crossed his face. Something complicated. Something that didn't resolve into any single emotion. "We arrived at the same destination from different directions. Which tells me the trail you left wasn't as clean as you thought." Dae-hyun's composure was deteriorating visibly now. The calculation behind his eyes was still running, but it was running desperately, pulling at threads that weren't connecting. "You don't understand the full picture, Bertrand," Jae-seong said. The name landed like a physical thing. Dae-hyun went very still. "I found him 4 days ago," Jae-seong said. "He was easier to find than you'd think, once you know what you're looking for." He talked. A pause. Not because he wanted to, but he talked. The room was absolutely silent except for the low hum of the monitor beside Zariah's bed. Dae-hyun looked at his mother. A quick, involuntary look, the look of someone searching for rescue from the only person they still believed might provide it. Yoon-ji did not move. She was looking at her older son. "She knew," Jae-seong said. His voice changed almost imperceptibly on those 2 words. Flattened in a way that was more devastating than any anger would have been. He wasn't looking at Dae-hyun anymore. He was looking at his mother. "After it happened, when you found out what he'd done, you knew." Yoon-ji's chin lifted slightly. It was a small movement. A bracing movement. "You didn't call me," he said. "You didn't come to me. You decided." And here, for the first time, something cracked at the edge of his voice, something small and almost imperceptible that Zariah heard, because she was listening for it. "You decided that protecting the family meant protecting him. And then you came here tonight to finish it a different way." "I came here," Yoon-ji said quietly, "to protect you." "From what?" "From a choice you'll regret." "The choice I regret," he said, "is not having this conversation 11 days ago." He looked at her for a long moment. "You let me spend 11 days not knowing who put my wife in that hospital bed. Stood beside me. You sat at my table. You looked me in the face." Yoon-ji said nothing. "How many times," he said. "Did I ask you if you knew anything?" Still nothing. "How many times?" 3, she said finally. Softly. The word fell into the room and didn't move. Zariah watched Jae-seong absorb that, watched his face, go through something she had no word for, not grief, not rage, but something underneath both of those, something older and more fundamental. The look of a man discovering that the architecture he built his entire understanding of loyalty on has a crack running through its foundation that was always there, that he simply never had occasion to look at directly before tonight. He turned away from his mother. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room for a moment. Just a moment. Then he turned back. "Here's what happens now," he said. Dae-hyun opened his mouth. "Dae-hyun." Jae-seong's eyes cut to him. "I said, here is what happens now. Not, here is where you explain yourself. Not, here is where you negotiate. Here is what happens now." The silence that followed was total. And in that silence, Zariah Monroe looked at the man she had married and understood, for the first time since she had opened her eyes in this hospital room 11 days ago, that the night was not over. That the hardest part of it for all of them, including her, including him, was still waiting on the other side of whatever Jae-seong was about to say. Clock on her phone read 3:31 a.m., 29 minutes before the evidence left Chicago without them. 29 minutes before there was no version of this night that anyone in this room could control anymore. Dae-hyun understood that. She could see it on his face. The moment the mathematics of his situation resolved into something that couldn't be talked around or maneuvered out of. He had planned for many contingencies. He had not planned for his brother, standing in a hospital room at 3 a.m., having heard every word he had said, and having arrived, independently, at the same evidence from a different direction. He had not planned for Zariah. He looked at her now directly, for the first time since Jae-seong had stepped from behind the curtain. And what was on his face in that unguarded moment was not hatred, and it was not fear exactly, though fear was part of it. It was something Zariah found almost worse than either of those things. It was the expression of a man who had genuinely not believed she was capable of this, who had looked at her for 3 years and seen something manageable, something that could be removed cleanly, like a splinter, without consequence, and was only now understanding the depth of that miscalculation. "You should have left when you had the offer," he said to her. His voice was tight, stripped of everything except the raw center of it. Zariah held his gaze. "I wasn't leaving," she said. "I was never leaving. That was always the part you didn't understand." Jae-seong turned from the window, and for the first time that night, the three Kwan's mother, older son, younger son stood in the same room, on completely different sides of an irreversible line, and every one of them knew it. And none of them had any road left that led anywhere except through whatever Jae-seong was about to do next. He walked back to the center of the room, not fast, not slow, the deliberate pace of a man who has made a decision and is not second-guessing it, which was somehow the most frightening thing about him in that moment, not his anger, but the absolute absence of hesitation beneath it. He looked at Dae-hyun. "Sit down," he said. Dae-hyun didn't move. Dae-hyun. Same volume. Same tone. The way you speak to someone when you are very certain that the next thing you say will end something permanently, and you want them present for it. "Sit down." This time Dae-hyun sat. He took the chair near the wall, not the one Yoon-ji had used, not the one beside the bed, but the one furthest from the door, as though some instinct was already calculating exits and finding all of them closed. He sat in it like a man lowering himself onto something he knows is going to hurt. Yoon-ji remained standing. She had not been told to sit. She had not been told to do anything, and she was not the kind of woman who accepted instructions she hadn't been explicitly given. She stood near the foot of the bed, with her hands clasped in front of her and her eyes on her older son. And Zariah, watching her, had the strange and unsettling thought that even now, even in this Yoon-ji Kwan was managing. Processing, looking for the angle that salvaged something from the wreckage. It was, Zariah thought, the most terrifying thing about her. Jae-seong stood between them both, and he said very quietly, "Tell me everything. From the beginning, no version of events, no framing. What you did when you decided to do it, and who helped you." Dae-hyun looked at the floor. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Dae-hyun looked up. "Start," Jae-seong said. The silence stretched for 3 full seconds. Then Dae-hyun let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere very deep, and he began to talk. He didn't start with the crash. He started further back, much further back than Zariah had expected, further back than even the phone records she'd reconstructed suggested. He started 18 months ago with a meeting that Jae-seong hadn't known about, in a private room above a restaurant in Pilsen, between Dae-hyun and 3 men who represented a competing operation that had been quietly expanding into territory. The Kwan organization considered its own. Zariah watched Jae-seong's face as Dae-hyun talked. She watched it very carefully, because she had learned over 3 years that his face was where truth lived, not in his words, not in his actions, but in the small muscular responses of a face he had spent his entire adult life learning to control. And what she saw moving across it as Dae-hyun described the meeting in Pilsen was not what she expected. It wasn't rage. It was recognition. The particular devastating expression of a man hearing confirmed what some part of him has suspected for a long time but refused to fully name. "The Mercer Group," Jae-seong said. Not a question. Dae-hyun stopped talking. "The Mercer Group," Jae-seong said again, and now there was something new in his voice, something thin and cold that ran beneath the words like a current beneath ice. "I had intelligence 18 months ago about contact being made. I investigated it. The trail went cold." He looked at his brother. "You helped it go cold?" Dae-hyun said nothing. You were the one I put on that investigation, Jae-seong said. You came back to me with nothing. I trusted that. The word trusted sat in the room like a wound. I had my reasons, Dae-hyun said. Tell me the reasons. Dae-hyun leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and the posture was different now, less defensive. More like a man who has decided that if he's going to drown, he might as well stop treading water and say what he actually means. There was something almost relieved about it. The way people sometimes go slack once the worst thing has already happened, and there's nothing left to protect. You were never going to let me lead, he said. You know that. You've always known that. I've been beside you for 11 years. 11 years of doing everything right. Every assignment, every negotiation, every piece of dirty work you needed done, without asking questions, and every time something opened up, every time there was a real seat at the table, you found a reason to keep me adjacent. Never central, never equal. He paused, and then you married her. The her landed with a specific weight. Zariah absorbed it without moving. And suddenly, she was more in your confidence than I'd been in 11 years of bleeding for this family. His voice didn't rise. Dropped. That was somehow worse. You talked to her. You asked her opinions on things you'd never asked mine. You let her into rooms, not physical rooms, but rooms in your head that I couldn't get into with a decade of loyalty. He shook his head slightly. So yes, I made contact. I made contact because I needed leverage, and because I needed options, and because I was tired of waiting for something you were never going to give me. The room was completely silent. Jae-seong hadn't moved during any of it. He stood in the same position, same stillness, and the only thing that had changed was the quality of the stillness denser, somehow more loaded. And the crash, he said. Dae-hyun looked at his hands. The Mercer Group wanted proof that I was serious, that I was actually willing to do what needed doing to make a transition viable. He stopped. Zariah was the proof, Jae-seong said. Dae-hyun didn't answer. He didn't need to. Look at me, Jae-seong said. Dae-hyun looked up. His face was doing something complicated, guilt and defiance, and the residue of a logic that had made perfect sense to him at the time, and was now, in the fluorescent light of this hospital room, with his brother looking at him like that, caving inward on itself. Say it, Jae-seong said. Say what you decided. I decided that if she was gone, Dae-hyun said, you'd be destabilized. Long enough. That's all it needed to be. Long enough for the transition to. Long enough, Jae-seong repeated. Yes, long enough. He said it a third time, and each repetition was quieter than the last. You decided my wife's death would be long enough. Dae-hyun's jaw tightened. He didn't look away. Whatever else he was not, in this moment, going to perform remorse he didn't fully feel. Maybe that was the only honest thing he'd done all night. And you, Jae-seong said. He turned to his mother. Yoon-ji had not moved. Her hands were still clasped. Her face was a controlled surface, but beneath it, beneath the architecture of self-possession she'd spent 60-some years constructing something, was happening that she couldn't entirely contain. Her eyes were bright, not with tears, with the particular brightness of a person under extreme internal pressure. When did you find out? Jae-seong said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the night it happened. The words dropped like stones. Jace absorbed them. His chest moved. One breath, controlled, deliberate. The night it happened, he said. Zariah was in surgery. Yes. And you came to me the next morning, and you sat with me, and you told me. He stopped. Started again. You told me the investigation would find whoever was responsible. You held my arm. His voice fractured slightly on those last three words. Just slightly, just enough. You held my arm, and you already knew. Yoon-ji's chin lifted, that bracing gesture again. I was trying to determine the full scope of what had happened before. Stop, she stopped. Stop explaining it, he said. I don't want the explanation. I've heard enough explanations tonight. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face. Something that had nothing to do with power or authority. Something much older and more undefended than any of that. You knew who put her in that bed, and you sat beside me, and you didn't say a word. Yoon-ji's composure held, but her voice, when she spoke, was not entirely steady. I made the decision I believed protected this family. She is my family. Jae-sung said. The statement was simple. 3 words. No decoration, no elaboration. But in the room, in the context of everything that had been said in the last 40-some minutes, it landed like a detonation. Yoon-ji looked at her son, really looked at him. And Zariah, watching from the bed, saw the precise moment when Yoon-ji Kwon understood that something had shifted permanently, not just tonight, but in the structural reality of what her relationship with this man was and would be. The moment a mother looks at her child and sees, for the first time, that the person standing in front of her is completely, irreversibly his own. You would choose her, Yoon-ji said, not accusing. More like confirming, testing whether the thing she was seeing was real. I already chose her, Jae-seong said, 3 years ago. In front of witnesses. I thought you understood what that meant. I understood what you believed it meant, she said quietly. I had hoped experience would adjust your understanding. Experience did adjust my understanding, he said. Just not the way you planned. Dae-yoon moved. Not dramatically. He shifted in the chair, recrossing his legs, and the movement drew everyone's attention for a fraction of a second. When Zariah looked at him, she saw that his eyes had gone somewhere else. Not to the room, not to the conversation. Somewhere internal. The calculation had started again. She could see it. The desperate, rerouting calculation of a man who has run out of the plan he came in with and is building a new one in real time from whatever materials are left. She did not like what she saw there. Jae Dae-yeon said. His voice had changed again, softer now, with a texture that Zariah recognized from 3 years of family dinners. The younger brother voice. The one that came out when nothing else was working. I know there's nothing I can say tonight that fixes this. I'm not trying to fix it. I need you to hear that it wasn't about her. It was never personal. Zariah's eyes moved to him. It was about the organization, he continued. It was about what I believed was best for the family long term. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. But if you can separate the act from the intent. The act, Zariah said. Dae-yeon looked at her. He hadn't expected her to speak. The act, she said again, and her voice was very quiet and very clear, was arranging for a car to push me off a highway at midnight. That's the act. She held his gaze. There's no intent in the world that lives in a different category than that. Dae-hyun looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Jae-seong. You're going to let her? Yes, Jae-seong said simply. There's silence. Dae-yeon stood up. The movement was abrupt enough that Jae-seong shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, not a flinch. Nothing as readable as that, but a readiness. A recalibration of physical position that happened in under a second and came from somewhere deeper than thought. You need to think about what you're doing, Dae-yeon said. The softness was gone. The younger brother voice had collapsed. What was underneath it was harder and less rehearsed. You strip me out? You think that's clean? You think the Mercer Group just disappears? I've been in contact with them for 18 months. They know our structure. They know our people. You burn me. You're not just burning me. You're burning the firewall between them and everything we have. You need me on the inside of this, not outside of it. Jae-song looked at him. That's not a threat, Dae-yoon said quickly. I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you the reality of the situation as it actually exists. Because someone in this room should be talking about reality. You made contact with the Mercer Group, Jae-seong said slowly. You maintained that contact for 18 months. You used that contact to arrange an attack on my wife. He paused. And your argument for why I should keep you inside my organization is that you've compromised it. Dae-hyun's mouth tightened. My argument is that the damage is already done and burning me doesn't repair it. No, Jae-seong said. It doesn't repair it. He looked at his brother steadily. But it tells everyone watching exactly where I stand. Which, right now, is the only currency that matters. Dae-hyun stared at him. The calculation behind his eyes ran faster, pulled at more threads, came up empty in more places. You'd really do this, he said, to your own brother. You arranged the death of my wife, Jae-seong said. Figure out which of those two things is the betrayal. Dae-hyun turned toward the door. Stop, Jae-seong said. Dae-hyun stopped. His back was to the room. The clock, Jae-seong said. On Zariah's phone, the 4 a.m. deadline. A pause. That evidence goes to the same people it was always going to go to. Nothing changes because I was in this room. Nothing changes because you've said what you've said. The only question is whether you walk out of here with some fragment of dignity or whether you make this uglier than it needs to be. Zae-yoon turned back. His face had gone somewhere past calculation, somewhere raw. You'd hand your own brother, too. You handed my wife to the highway, Jae-seong said. Don't talk to me about family. The words were quiet, surgical, and they cut Dae-yoon in a way that the room could almost see a visible impact, somewhere in the chest, somewhere that didn't have armor. Dae-yoon looked at his mother. Yoon-ji looked back at him, and for the first time that night she looked old. Not in a physical sense, she was still composed, still upright, still wearing every one of her 62 years, with the iron posture she'd maintained her entire life. But in her eyes, something had aged past its limit. The weight of the decision she'd made 10 days ago, the decision to protect the younger at the expense of the whole, sat on her face in a way she couldn't arrange away. She gave him nothing. No rescue, no signal. She had played every card she had, and the table had cleared against her. And what was left was just the two of them, mother and son, standing in a hospital room at 3:40 the morning, and she had nothing left to offer him except the truth of what their choices had produced. Dae-yoon looked between them both. Something in his expression broke along a fault line and reformed into something Zariah had never seen on his face before. Not rage, not desperation, something quieter and more permanent. The face of a man who is finishing a calculation he started a long time ago and arriving finally at the real sum. You should know, he said, and his voice had gone very flat, the way voices go when a person has moved past the emotion and arrived at the cold factual center of something that Bertrand wasn't working alone on the operational end. There was a second contact. Someone internal. Someone who's still in your organization right now who helped coordinate the logistics of the crash and has been feeding information to the Mercer Group independently of me. The room went absolutely still. Jae-seong's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened into a point. A name, he said. Dae-yoon looked at his mother. A long look. Something passed between them, not forgiveness, not anything warm, but some ancient and unresolvable mother and son communication that existed below language. Then he looked back at Jae-seong. Elias, he said. The name hit Zariah like cold water. Elias, who had come to her room on the evening of day 10 with takeout containers and a warning, who had told her there would be visitors, who had given her exactly enough time to build the confirmation message, exactly enough time to put the evidence somewhere safe, exactly enough information to walk into tonight, prepared. Who had, she now understood, also known what was coming because he had helped design part of it. Her mind ran it backward at speed. The warning Elias had given her, she had understood it as loyalty. She had understood it as a man with a conscience who couldn't stay silent. But now, reframed through what Dae-yoon had just said, it took a different shape entirely. If Elias had been feeding information to the Mercer Group, if Elias had been inside the logistics of the crash, then the warning he had given her was not conscience. It was insurance. It was a man who had bet on multiple outcomes and was making sure that, no matter which one materialized, he had a thread of protection running through it. If Zariah survived tonight, if she came out of this room intact, if Jae-seong stood with her, then Elias had a claim. He had warned her. He had, in some version of events, helped her. And if she hadn't survived tonight, then the warning had cost him nothing, because she wasn't alive to describe it. She thought about the phone calls she had made on day 10. 3 of them. Tamsin, Marcus, the lawyer. And then, after she'd set the dead man protocol in motion, she had gone over her plan once more in her head and found what she believed was a gap, a specific question about timing and confirmation that she'd needed answered. She had called Elias. She had told him about the 4A.M. deadline. She had told him in what form the evidence existed. She had not told him where it was going or who was holding it, but she had told him enough. Enough that if he had passed that information to the Mercer Group within the last 6 hours, the people who were supposed to be holding the evidence outside Chicago might already be compromised. Her phone was on the tray table, 3:44 a.m., 16 minutes. She sat up straighter, and the movement pulled at her rib, and she absorbed the pain without making a sound. Her hand moved toward the phone. Jae-seong watched her. He didn't ask. He understood from her face that something had shifted. "Person holding the evidence," she said. Her voice was even. "I need to reach them now, before 4. "Why?" Jae-seong said. She looked at him. "Because I told Elias about the deadline." Not everything, but enough. Jae-seong's expression didn't change for about 2 seconds. Then he moved, and for the first time that night, she saw him move with urgency. The kind of urgency that stripped away all the control and showed the man underneath it. The man who was not immune to fear but had simply learned to move through it faster than most people. He reached into his jacket and had his own phone in his hand before she had unlocked her screen. "Elias's location," he said into his phone. Low, fast. Right now. Daeyeon was watching this with the expression of someone who has done something and is now watching the radius of it expand past what they anticipated. Yoon-ji had gone very still. Her hands were no longer clasped. They had dropped to her sides, and she stood with them, hanging there, slightly open. And the posture was so unlike her that Zariah registered it physically as wrongness. "He's not at the location," said a voice on Jae-seong's phone. His tracker went offline approximately 40 minutes ago. 40 minutes ago, while Jae-seong was still behind the curtain, while Daeyoon was still threatening, while the room was still sealed in its terrible private theater of confrontation, Elias had gone dark. Jae-seong lowered the phone. He looked at Zariah. She looked at him. 10 minutes. Possibly compromised evidence. A man who knew enough to do damage now invisible inside a city at 3:44 in the morning. And a room full of people who had just realized that what had felt like the end of the crisis was in fact only the surface of it. Zariah picked up her phone. She went to the thread. She found the message. She had prepared the confirmation code, the one that would tell the person on the other end to hold, to wait, to do nothing until they heard from her. She had built the protocol with a hold function because she had anticipated that she might need to extend the window. She had been careful about that. She typed the hold message. She sent it. She waited. The seconds moved like something physical. The reply came back in 40 seconds. 4 words, message not delivered. Number inactive. Zariah stared at the screen. The number was inactive. The phone on the other end, the one belonging to the person she had trusted outside Chicago, the person holding the compiled evidence, person who was the entire structural foundation of everything she had built in 11 days of recovery, was off, or had been turned off, or had been taken from someone who could no longer use it. She looked at the clock. 3:46 a.m., 14 minutes. Jae-seong was watching her face. He read it the way he read everything completely, quickly, without asking for an explanation he could already see. "Tell me," he said. "The hold message didn't go through," she said. "The number is inactive." The room was absolutely silent. Daeyoon, from his position near the wall, let out a slow breath that was almost not a sound of relief. Almost. Zariah heard it. She turned and looked at him, and he met her eyes, and what she saw there was not triumph. It was worse than triumph. It was the expression of a man watching a trap close that he had set a long time ago and forgotten about, and finding it still works. "The Mercer Group has had access to my communications," she said. Not to anyone in particular, working it out loud, through Elias. "For how long?" Daeyoon said nothing. "How long?" she said again directly to him. "How long was Elias feeding them?" 4 months, Daeyoon said. Quietly, without pleasure, whatever satisfaction he might have been performing had burned off. What was underneath it was more genuine and harder to read. Not guilt, not remorse, something more complicated. The specific expression of a man who is watching his own plan consume things he had told himself it wouldn't touch. 4 months, before the crash, before the photographs. Before Zariah had started building anything. Which meant that the pipeline she had established, Tamsin, Marcus, the lawyer, the safe house outside Chicago, had been potentially visible for 4 months to people who wanted everything she was building to fail. She sat with that for approximately 2 seconds. Then she said, "Tamsin." She dialed Tamsin's number. It rang 3 times. 4. On the 5th ring, the line picked up. Dead air. Tamsin, Zariah said. Pause. Then a voice not Tamsin's. Male. Professionally neutral in the way of men who work carefully and don't want to be described later. Ms. Monroe, I'd encourage you to think carefully about the next 14 minutes. Her rib pulled. She breathed through it. Where is she? Zariah said. She's fine. She'll stay fine as long as we reach a reasonable outcome here. Jae-seong was already moving not towards Zariah, but sideways, pulling his phone back up, making contact with someone outside the room. His voice was very low, giving rapid instructions that Zariah couldn't fully follow, but whose urgency she could feel from across the room like a temperature change. What do you want? Zariah said into the phone. Her voice was steady. She was not going to give this man the sound of her fear. She was not going to do that. What we want, the voice said, is simple. The evidence package your friend has been holding doesn't reach its intended destination. You send the cancellation code instead of the confirmation. Mr. Kwan's brother continues in his current role without consequence. And everyone goes home. Zariah looked at the clock. 3:48. 12 minutes. She looked at Jae-song. He had finished his call. He was watching her with an expression that she had never seen on his face before, in 3 years of knowing him stripped of every layer of authority and control, down to something bare and human and frightened. Not for himself. She understood what he was asking without him saying it. She looked back at the phone in her hand, and she understood, in that moment, that every plan she had built in 11 days of recovery, every careful thread, every safeguard, every backup had led her to this exact moment, where the choice was not between safety and danger, where the choice was not between evidence and silence. The choice was between Tamsin's life and everything else. And the voice on the other end of the phone knew that, had known it when they chose Tamsin specifically, had looked at the network Zariah had built and chosen the one thread in it that was not professional, not strategic, not connected to any of this by anything except the oldest and most exploitable thing. Friendship, the kind that predates everything else, and therefore cuts deeper than everything else. 12 minutes. Zariah's thumb hovered over the screen. She thought about Tamsin's voice on the phone at day 4. Are you in trouble? In the way she had said yes, essentially, without saying it. And Tamsin had not asked any more questions. She had just helped. That was the thing about Tamsin. She didn't perform loyalty. She just practiced it, quietly and without ceremony, the way some people practice breathing. She thought about what canceling the evidence meant. Not abstractly, concretely. Dae-yoon walks out of this room intact. The Mercer Group absorbs the concession and keeps building. Elias surfaces somewhere tomorrow morning with a clean story and a protected position. And the car that nudged her off the highway. At midnight, the sound of metal, the smell of rain like iron becomes a thing that happened and was absorbed and was paid for by no one. She thought about all of that in approximately 4 seconds. Then she looked at Jae-song. How many people do you have outside this building right now? She said. He looked at her. 4. More coming. But how long? 15 minutes minimum. 12 minutes on the clock. 15 minutes for backup. A phone in her hand with a man on it who was waiting for a cancellation code she had never actually created because she had built this protocol herself, alone, in a hospital bed at 2A. On day 9, and she had built it with one confirmation code and one hold code and nothing else because she had not planned for Tamsin, because Tamsin was supposed to be safe, because Tamsin was outside all of it. He's waiting for a cancellation code, she said to Jae-seong. Low, just for him. Jae-song's eyes didn't move from her face. There isn't one, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not relief too complicated for relief. More like the particular focus of a man who has just been handed the specific shape of a problem and is already building toward its edges. He doesn't know that, Jae-seong said. She looked at him. He doesn't know there's no cancellation code, Jae-seong said. He's assuming the protocol has one because every protocol has one. He'll wait for it, he held her gaze. That buys us time. How much time? Enough to find Tamsin. Zariah looked back at the phone. The line was still open. The voice on the other end had not spoken. Again, it was waiting, with the practiced patience of someone who does this for a living and knows that silence creates more pressure than words. She raised the phone back to her ear. "I need to access the protocol remotely," she said. Her voice was completely controlled, not perform-controlled, which is different. Performed calm cracks under pressure. Controlled calm is a structure, load-bearing, built from the inside. That takes time. The code isn't something I have memorized. Stored. A pause on the other end. How long? 10 minutes. Another pause. Longer. The man was running his own calculation. "You've Sesson," he said. "After that, the situation with your friend becomes more complicated." The line went quiet again. Not disconnected. Just waiting. Zariah lowered the phone. Jasong was already moving. He had crossed to the door and opened it without making a sound, and was speaking in a voice so low it was barely audible to Zariah from across the room, something rapid and precise to whoever was stationed outside. She caught fragments. "Building southwest corner. Triangulate from the call." Then something about a name she didn't recognize. Then, "Don't let him move her." He came back inside and closed the door. "My people can triangulate the call if he stays on the line long enough," he said. "We need him talking." Zariah nodded. She looked at the phone. Then at Dae-Hyun. Dae-Hyun was sitting very still near the wall, watching all of it with an expression that was impossible to read cleanly. He was past the point of strategy and not quite arrived at acceptance. He existed in some suspended place between them, watching the room operate around him, like a man standing in a current he can't fight. "You knew about Elias," Zariah said to him, not accusing, just placing the fact. "Yes," he said. "You knew Tamsin was in the pipeline." Pause. Shorter than she expected. "Yes, you set this up before you came here tonight." "It was a contingency," he said. "If the room went wrong, and if I'd signed the papers?" He looked at her steadily. "Tamsin would have gone home. She was never the point. She was the insurance." Zariah absorbed that, filed it. She did not have the time right now to fully feel what she felt about it, so she put it somewhere she could find it later and looked back at the phone in her hand. "Keep him on the line," Jae-song said. 3 minutes. Minimum. She raised the phone. "I'm accessing it now," she said into the line. "The storage is encrypted. The retrieval takes a minute." "I'm watching the clock," the voice said. "So am I." She kept the phone to her ear and looked at Jae-seong. He held up 3 fingers, counting. She needed to fill 3 minutes with enough credible detail to keep this man patient without triggering the alarm that tells a professional he's being stalled. The protocol was built in segments, she said into the phone. Steady voice, measured pace, the rhythm of someone doing exactly what they said they were doing. The cancellation code is in the 3rd segment. The access sequence requires a secondary authentication that routes through a server that isn't always fast. She paused. "You'd know this if you had full access to the architecture." "Which you don't." Silence on the line. She had taken a risk with that last sentence, pushing back slightly enough to signal that she wasn't broken, wasn't panicking, wasn't going to be rushed into a mistake by pressure alone. She needed him to believe she was cooperating, and men like him don't believe cooperation that looks like submission. They believe cooperation that looks like a woman who is smart enough to understand her situation and has made a rational decision to work within it. "Fair," the voice said. "Good." Jae-song had his phone pressed to his ear. He was listening to something, face tight, eyes moving. He held up 2 fingers. 2 more minutes. Yoon-ji, in the corner of the room, had not moved. She was watching Jae-song with an expression Zariah couldn't fully interpret from her position. Not pride. Not the opposite of pride either. Something more ambivalent. The expression of a woman who has spent her life believing that the way she does things is the only way that works, and is watching her son demonstrate, in real time, a different way, and finding that the ground she's standing on is less certain than it was an hour ago. Zariah kept talking into the phone. Small technical details fabricated and plausible. Server routing, authentication windows, segmented retrieval. She had learned enough about these systems through 3 years of quiet attention to sound like someone who knew what she was talking about. She didn't rush. Rushing was the signal. Rushing said, "I'm buying time." Measured pace said, "I'm doing the thing I said I'm doing." Jae-seong lowered his phone. He looked at her. His expression told her something had happened. She read it in the change of his jaw, the way his shoulders adjusted by a fraction of a degree. She didn't ask. She kept her face neutral, and her voice even, and her eyes moving between him and the middle distance of someone staring at a screen that wasn't there. "One finger. One more minute," she said into the phone. "The secondary authentication is running." 30 seconds, the voice said. "It doesn't run faster, because you count," she said. "Give it the time it needs. A beat, 20 seconds. Jae-seong's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Something crossed his face, fast and decisive, and he turned toward the door. 10, the voice said. "Got it," Zariah said into the phone. She said it with the exact texture of someone who has just found what they were looking for. Not relief, not triumph, just the flat functional confirmation of a task completed. The voice waited. The cancellation code is, she started. The door to the hospital room opened. Not Jae-seong. He was standing 3 feet from it. The door opened from outside, and the man who came through it was someone Zariah had never seen before, late 40s, compact build, the particular kind of unremarkable face that is itself a professional characteristic. He had a phone in his hand. He looked at the room, at Jae-seong specifically, and he gave a single small nod. They had found her. Zariah took a breath. "The cancellation code is invalid," she said into the phone. "'Cause I didn't build one." She paused. "Let that land. And your colleague just walked into a room with 5 of my husband's people. So I'd think very carefully about the next thing you do." The line went dead. Zariah set the phone on the tray table. The room was very still for about 3 seconds. Then Jae-seong was at the door, moving through it, and the man who had entered was beside him, and the quality of the silence in the hallway outside changed. She could hear it through the open door, the sound of controlled movement, multiple people, particular absence of wasted sound that belongs to people who do difficult things without announcing them. Dae-yoon was on his feet. He hadn't moved toward the door. He was standing in the center of the room, between the bed and the wall, and his face had completed its transition into Zariah had not seen on it before this night. Not the calculating ambition, not the younger brother performance, not even the desperate pragmatism of the last hour. What was on his face now was the raw, stripped-down expression of a man, standing at the end of a very long road, and finding nothing on the other side of it that he wanted. "They'll find her," Zariah said, not gently, not cruelly either, just factually. "That's what's happening right now. They'll find her and she'll be fine." Dae-yoon looked at her. "You don't know that?" "No," she said, "but I know your contingency just failed. And I know the people holding her know it too, which means the calculus for them changes." She held his gaze. "They're contractors. They're not true believers. When the leverage disappears, so does the risk." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat back down. Not with any grace, he basically dropped into the chair, like something had been cut in him that was holding him upright. Yoon-ji hadn't moved from her corner. Zariah looked at her. "Going to be all right," she said, meaning Jae-seong. She wasn't sure why she said it to Yoon-ji specifically. Maybe because Yoon-ji was the only other person in the room who was tracking him the way Zariah was, with that particular combination of knowledge and helplessness that belongs to people who love. Someone who walks toward danger as a professional habit. Yoon-ji looked at her. "I know," she said, and then very quietly, in a voice that cost her something to produce, "I taught him how." The admission sat between them. Small, enormous. Zariah didn't respond to it. She didn't have the capacity right now for what a real response would require. She filed it in the same place she'd put everything else that needed to be felt later, and she looked at the clock on her phone. 3:57 a.m., 3 minutes before the original deadline. The evidence, if the person holding it was still intact, still reachable, still operational, would move automatically in 3 minutes unless she sent the confirmation hold. The number was inactive. She picked up her phone and went to the secondary contact. The backup she had told no one about. Not Elias. Not Tamsin. The lawyer, the woman she had met at a fundraiser 2 years ago. The one with the reputation that made other lawyers uncomfortable. She had given this woman 2 things, a copy of everything, and a secondary confirmation protocol that operated completely independently of the first. She had told no one about the second protocol, not because she anticipated Elias, not because she predicted tonight specifically. She had built it because she was someone who understood, at a very basic level, that the people who survive impossible situations are not the people who plan for what they expect. They are the people who plan for what they don't. She sent the secondary confirmation. Hold, secure, wait for direct contact. The reply came back in 11 seconds. Confirmed. Package secure, standing by. Zariah set the phone down. She let out a breath that started somewhere deep in her chest and moved through her rib and cost her something physical. A small, sharp pull of pain that she absorbed and released and didn't make a sound about. Then she sat in the quiet hospital room with Dae-hyun Kwon across from her and Yoonji Kwon in the corner, and she waited. Jae-seong came back 14 minutes later. He came through the door, and before she could read his face, she heard his voice, not the words, just the register of it. The particular frequency that she had learned over 3 years meant the worst of something was over. He was talking to someone in the hall, low and fast, and then the conversation ended, and the door closed, and he was in the room. He looked at Zariah first. Always her first, she realized. Every time he re-entered a space, his eyes found her before anything else. She had noticed it before, in other texts, and thought it was unconscious. Now, watching it happen in a hospital room at 4 in the morning, she understood it was something else entirely. It was a habit built from fear. The specific, practiced fear of a man who cares about something he cannot fully control. She's safe, he said. They left her in a car on Wabash. Keys in the ignition. They were gone before my people arrived. He looked at Zariah steadily. She's shaken. She'll need to be looked after tonight. But she's not hurt. Something moved through Zariah's chest. She pressed her hand flat against the blanket and breathed through it. Okay, she said. Okay. He crossed the room and sat beside the bed, not in the chair, on the edge of the bed itself, and the mattress shifted slightly with his weight, and the warmth of him sitting that close, after 11 days of distance, was almost unbearable. The secondary protocol held, she told him. He looked at her. There was a backup, she said, completely independent. I didn't tell anyone about it. The evidence is still intact and secure. He was quiet for a moment. Then you built a system with a component that no one who might compromise you had any knowledge of. Yes, including me, including you. He absorbed that. His jaw moved slightly. Good, he said, one word. And in it, she heard something that was wounded pride, or not only that, but something more than that. The specific, reluctant admission of a man who is in the process of accepting that his understanding of who he married has been systematically and significantly underestimated. Dae-hyun stood up again. He did it more slowly this time. The energy of earlier was gone, and what moved him now was something more fundamental, the basic human need to not be sitting when something final is being said to you. So that's it, he said. Jae-seong looked at him. The evidence goes wherever it goes, Dae-hyun said. I don't fight it. I don't run. Is that what you're telling me? I'm telling you the choice was always yours, Jae-seong said. You made one 11 days ago. Now you make another one. And if I cooperate, if I give you the full Mercer structure, everything I know, everyone I met with, every transaction, then that information goes to the same people the evidence goes to, Jae-seong said. And they factor it in however they factor it in. I don't control outcomes. I don't arrange them. Not this time. Dae-hyun looked at him. That's not a deal. No, Jae-seong agreed. It's not. Then why would I cooperate? Because, Jae-seong said, the alternative is that you don't cooperate, and the evidence goes anyway. And then you have nothing, not information, not leverage, not the argument that you helped when you could have made it harder. He paused. It's not a deal, but it's the difference between a man who ran toward the edge and a man who at least stopped at it. Dae-hyun was silent for a long time. The room held its breath. Then Dae-yoon looked at his mother. Yoon-ji looked back at her younger son. And the look she gave him was the most human thing Zariah had seen from her. All night, not strategic, not managing, just the look of a mother watching her child arrive at the boundary of what she can protect him from. Old grief. The specific grief of a parent who understands they are about to watch their child step into consequences they helped create and cannot absorb. Do what he says, she said quietly. No inflections. Just the truth. Something crossed Dae-yoon's face. Zariah expected anger. She expected resistance. What came instead was something much quieter and much sadder, the expression of a man who has been fighting for a long time and has just felt the specific exhaustion of a battle run entirely to its end. He nodded, one nod, small, final. Jae-song looked at the door and opened it and said a name into the hallway, and two men came in, and they positioned themselves near Dae-yoon without drama, without physical contact. Just present in the particular way that made certain things very clear, without requiring anyone to say them aloud. Dae-yoon walked to the door. He stopped at the threshold. He turned back once, not to Jae-song, not to his mother. He looked at Zariah. She held his gaze. She gave him nothing, not contempt, not forgiveness, not the satisfaction of visible anger. She just looked at him, with the same steady eyes she had been wearing all night, the eyes she had been wearing for 11 days, the eyes she had been wearing. She understood now, for 3 years in a family that had decided she didn't belong. He looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he looked away and walked through the door. The door closed. Yoon-ji moved for the first time in a long while. She straightened, minutely, and adjusted the position of her hands, and looked at Jae-seong. And me, she said, not a plea, just the next item. Jae-seong looked at his mother. And whatever happened on his face in that moment was private. Zariah looked away from it because it wasn't hers. It belonged to the two of them, and to whatever 34 years of that specific relationship had built between them. She heard him speak. She heard Yoon-ji respond. She didn't register the specific words. She heard the tone of it, controlled, final, without cruelty and without warmth. Then she heard footsteps, then the door, then silence. She looked up. Jae-seong was standing in the center of the room, alone. The first time that night since she had opened her eyes and seen him step from behind the curtain, that they were truly alone. No Dae-yoon, no Yoon-ji, no Marissa Crane with her leather folder. No man on the phone, no evidence in the balance, no clock running. Just the two of them. And all the things that had not yet been said between them, which was where the real weight of the night lived, not in the confrontations, not in the strategy, not in the evidence or the contingencies or the crisis that had just resolved. In the gap between them, in 11 days, in the specific silence of a man who had known something was wrong and had chosen to investigate it alone. Jae-seong came back to the bed. He sat where he had been sitting before. On the edge close, the mattress shifting. He said, "The lawyer." "Yes," she said. "The secondary protocol." "Yes, Marcus." "Yes." He nodded slowly, processing the architecture. Understanding the construction of it, not with resentment, she thought, or not primarily with resentment, but with something more complicated. The specific experience of a man who is very good at building things, discovering that someone he always is discovering has been quietly building something in the same room. "You did all of that," he said, "from this bed." "I had time," she said. His jaw moved. Not quite a smile, the ghost of one. "You had a fractured rib and a concussion. I also had a phone and a lot of reasons to be awake at 3 in the morning, she said. "Turns out that's enough." The ghost faded. His face settled back into something serious. "I should have been here." She looked at him. "Yes." "I should have come the first night." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. She let the silence be what it was. She didn't fill it, didn't soften it, didn't help him past it. He didn't need help past it. He needed to sit in it, and he knew that. And the fact that he wasn't trying to escape it told her something important. "I knew something was wrong," he said before the crash. "Weeks before. I had intelligence that suggested a threat. I was handling it." He stopped. "I decided that handling it meant managing it without bringing it to you." without frightening you. I thought I was protecting you. I know, she said. And while I was protecting you, he said, you were in that car. The words landed in the room and didn't move. Zariah looked at her hands on the blanket. She thought about the highway, about the second car, easing up alongside her in the dark, about the way she hadn't even had time to be afraid before it happened, about waking up in the hospital and asking for Jae-seong and being told he wasn't there. Protection, she said carefully, that decides what I'm allowed to know about my own life. That's not protection. She looked up at him. That's control. And I think you know the difference, even when you're telling yourself you don't. He held her gaze. He didn't defend himself. He didn't offer the explanations she could see sitting behind his eyes, reasonable ones probably, about the specific dangers of his world and the specific logic of keeping certain things away from certain people. He held them back because she was right, and he knew she was right, and the explanations, while true, did not actually address what she was saying. Yes, he said simply. Then we have to talk about that, she said. Not tonight, but soon. Yes, he said again. She looked at him for a long moment. This man she had chosen, this complicated, controlled, genuinely frightening man who had stood behind a curtain in a hospital room at 3 a.m. because he wanted to watch over her and had not wanted her to know he was there, which was, in miniature, the entire problem. The love was not in question, had never been in question. The love was enormous, and it was real, and it had been the single constant in 3 years of a life that had required her to be tougher than she had known she was. The question was what shape they built around it going forward. Question was not answered tonight. Couldn't be. Tonight was about survival, about evidence, about the people who had tried to remove her from the equation and had discovered the specific, costly mistake of underestimating what she was. The other question, the marriage question. The structure of their partnership that was a different conversation, and it required more than a hospital room at 4 a.m. The evidence, she said. What happens now? He exhaled. Back to the operational, which was more comfortable ground for both of them right now. The lawyer forwards everything to the appropriate contacts in the morning. Simultaneously, not sequentially, so nothing can be intercepted and held. Multiple recipients. Daeyeon's cooperation statement will be part of it. He paused. The Mercer Group loses its inside line with Elias gone. They'll pull back, at least temporarily. They're pragmatists. And Elias. Jae-seong's expression shifted into something harder. He'll surface. People like him always do. When he does, he stopped. What happens to him is not something I want to know the details of, Zariah said. He looked at her. No. She held his gaze. But I want to know that it happens. He nodded. It happens. She absorbed that, filed it. Moved on. Dae-yoon will have legal consequences, she said. From the cooperation, from the evidence that's out of your hands now. Yes. And your mother. He was quiet for a moment. I've made certain decisions regarding my mother. He said it carefully. The way you say something that cost you something to decide. She won't be in Chicago. She won't have authority in the organization or access to its structures. I'll make sure she's financially secure. But the rest, he stopped. The rest is done. Zariah looked at him. She understood the weight of that sentence. She understood that it was not a small thing that cutting Yoon-ji out of the organization, removing her from proximity to the power she had spent her life building and maintaining, was an act that would cost Jae-seong something he would not fully feel until later in some quiet moment when the adrenaline of tonight had long since metabolized. She did not thank him for it. It wasn't something you thanked someone for. It was a consequence, not a gift. There's something else, he said. She waited. The organization itself, he said. What it is. What it does. He looked at his hands briefly, then back at her. I've been thinking about this for longer than tonight. But tonight, he stopped. Tonight makes certain things impossible to keep deferring. Tell me, she said. The legitimate holdings there are more of them than most people know. Real estate, logistics, 3 manufacturing operations. They're real businesses. They make real money. He paused. The rest of it, the parts that built the initial capital, that established the territory, that made the name mean something. Those parts are the parts that put you in that car. Zariah was very still. I'm not walking away from everything overnight, he said. That's not possible, and claiming it would be is a lie I won't tell you. But I'm talking about direction. I'm talking about what the next 10 years looks like versus what the last 10 years looked like. He held her gaze steadily. And I'm talking about whether you'd be willing to help me figure that out. Openly, actually, not managed from a distance. The room was quiet. Outside, somewhere in the building, something mechanical hummed. A ventilation system, an elevator, the ordinary infrastructure of a building that had held, in one of its rooms, an extraordinary night. Zariah looked at her husband. She thought about the woman she had been 3 years ago, brilliant, careful, deeply uninterested in the kind of life she had ended up choosing. She thought about the specific moment she had understood who Jae-seong was beneath the power, not better than it, not separate from it, but genuinely complicated by it in ways that she had found, to her own surprise, worth engaging with. She thought about 11 days in this bed, about the reconstruction she had built from phone records and photographs, and the loyalty of people who had nothing to gain from helping her except the knowledge that they had done the right thing. She thought about Marcus and his 7-year-old daughter. She thought about Tamsin, sitting in a car on Wabash right now, shaken and alive. She thought about the highway, about the sound of metal, about the smell of rain like iron, about opening her eyes in this room for the first time and understanding, before any doctor told her anything, that she had survived something that was supposed to kill her. She looked at Jae-seong. I'll help you, she said. But I won't be managed. I won't be kept at the edge of things for my own protection. If I'm in where it matters, not decoratively. I know, he said. And if you decide something that affects my life, she said, you tell me. Before, not after. Not when it's already been handled. I know, he said again. Say it like you mean it, she said quietly. Not like you're agreeing because tonight was bad. Say it like you understand what you're agreeing to. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, no more protected secrets. No more decisions made for you. No more treating this marriage like another territory I manage. He paused. I was wrong. The way I handled the months before the crash, I was wrong. And it cost us almost everything. The admission sat between them. She let it sit. She didn't rush to fill it with absolution, because he hadn't asked for absolution. He had asked for acknowledgement that he understood the shape of what he'd done, and that was different. Okay, she said finally. He reached forward and put his hand over hers, on top of the blanket. The warmth of it, the specific familiar weight of his hand, which she had missed in 11 days more than she had been willing to admit, even to herself, moved through her, and settled somewhere she had been keeping carefully empty. She didn't pull away, but she didn't turn her hand over either. Not yet. Not yet. Outside the window, Chicago was doing what Chicago does at 4 a.m. In the deep part of autumn, breathing cold and dark and indifferent, the lake pushing its particular smell through the gaps in whatever the city tried to seal against it. The lights of the buildings burning with the impersonal warmth of a city that doesn't care what happened in any one of its rooms tonight and will look exactly the same at dawn, regardless. The clock on Zariah's phone read 9 a.m., 9 minutes past the deadline that had governed the entire night. The evidence was secure. Tamsin was safe. Dae-yoon was in the hands of men who would make sure he was somewhere accountable by morning. Yoon-ji was somewhere, in a car, probably, moving toward whatever the next chapter of her life looked like without the power she had built and lost in the span of one hospital room visit. And Jae-seong Kwon, the most feared man in the organization that bore his family's name, was sitting on the edge of his wife's hospital bed at 4 a.m. with his hand over hers, in a room that still smelled faintly of Yoon-ji's expensive perfume, and he was not managing anything. He was just sitting there. It was, Zariah thought, possibly the most honest she had ever seen him. She looked at their hands. She thought about everything that still needed to be said between them. The conversation about the months before the crash. The conversation about what partnership actually meant in a life like theirs. Conversations about the organization, about direction, about the 10 years ahead, and what shape she wanted her own life to take within them. Those conversations were real, and they were necessary, and they were going to be difficult in ways that tonight, for all its danger, had not been because tonight had been about survival. And survival has a clarity to it that the ongoing, complicated, daily work of a marriage does not. She knew all of that. She also knew that she was exhausted, that her rib was making every breath a small negotiation, that she had been awake for 22 hours and had spent 11 days rebuilding a life from a hospital bed, and the adrenaline that had carried her through the last 2 hours was metabolizing now, and what was underneath it was the specific, bone-deep tiredness of someone who has been holding something enormous for a very long time, and has finally in this moment been able to set it down. "I need to sleep," she said. He nodded. He didn't move. She looked at him. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "I know." And she meant it, not as forgiveness, not as the end of everything that needed to be worked through, but as a simple statement of present fact. She knew he was staying. She believed it. And the believing, after 11 days of not being entirely sure she should, was itself a kind of rest. She lay back against the pillow. He stayed where he was, on the edge of the bed, his hand still over hers. The monitor hummed. The ventilation system moved air through the building. Outside, Chicago breathed its cold, indifferent, particular breath. Zariah Monroe closed her eyes. Subsin isapmu dapai tedi. And somewhere in the infrastructure of the night, in the convergence of everything she had built and everything she had survived, in the evidence package, sitting secure with a lawyer whose reputation made other lawyers uncomfortable. In the phone call Tamsin was probably making right now to someone who loved her. In the specific shape of the choice Dayun had made when he looked at his mother and heard her say, "Do what he says," something shifted. Not resolved, not finished, not wrapped into any shape that resembled neat, but shifted, the way ground shifts after something moves through it. Changed at the foundation, even if the surface hasn't caught up yet. Changed in the way that matters deep, structural, pointing somewhere different than where it had been pointing when the night began. Zariah's breathing slowed. The clock moved past 4:15. Jaesong sat in the quiet and did not manage anything, and did not protect anyone from anything, and did not make a single decision about what truths were safe to share. He just sat with her, in the first honest silence they had shared in longer than either of them could have said precisely. And outside the window, the sky above Chicago was doing what it always does, in the hour before dawn, holding its darkest point, the specific deepest black that comes just before the first gray begins to break at the edge of the lake. The moment that looks most like night, because the morning hasn't yet decided to announce itself. It was the hour that belongs to people who have made it through something. They weren't certain they would make it through. And Zariah Monroe, 24 years old, fractured rib, bruise, still finishing its slow bloom across her temple, had made it through. Whatever came next, the legal proceedings, the restructuring, the long and genuinely difficult work of building something new from the wreckage of what the Kwan family had been. Whatever came next would require everything she had. She knew that. She also knew, in the way you know things that don't require proof, that she had enough. She had always had enough. The room breathed. The night held. And somewhere in the building below them, in a city that didn't care, and a world that would continue exactly as it had regardless, like the ordinary machinery of consequence, was beginning to move slow, patient, indifferent to the people it was about to touch, toward everything that had been building toward since the night a car came out of the dark on the I-90 and changed the direction of everything. The dawn came slowly over Chicago, the way it always does in late October reluctant, gray at the edges first, then a cold pale light that spread across the lake without warmth, just visibility. The kind of morning that doesn't comfort anyone, but at least makes the dark stop, pretending to be permanent. Zariah woke at 6:47 a.m. She knew before she opened her eyes that Jae-seong was still there. She could feel the warmth of him at the edge of the bed, the slight shift of weight that meant he hadn't moved. She lay still for a moment, with her eyes closed, and listened to the building coming to life around them. A cart rolling past in the hallway, a phone ringing 2 floors down, someone's voice carrying through the ventilation system in fragments. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a world that had continued while extraordinary things happened inside one of its rooms. She opened her eyes. He was sitting where he had been. He had not slept. She could see it in the quality of his stillness, not the stillness of rest, but the stillness of a man several hours doing very careful thinking and has arrived somewhere he is not yet ready to share. His jacket was off. His tie was loosened. For a man who rarely showed physical discomfort, those two details said more than most speeches. He looked at her when she moved. The look was direct and unguarded, in a way that she was not accustomed to from him. In the morning, she was accustomed to the version of him that arrived fully assembled, already managing, already 3 steps ahead of whatever the day required. This version was earlier than that, before the assembly. The man who existed underneath the architecture. "You didn't sleep," she said. "No. Did you eat anything?" Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "No, you should eat something." "I know." She sat up slowly, negotiating with her rib the way she had negotiated with it every morning, for 11 days, giving it a moment to register the position change, waiting for the sharpest part of the pain to settle into the duller background ache she had learned to work around. He watched her do it, without moving to help, because he had learned in the last 48 hours, possibly in the last 11 days, via some information delivered at a distance, that she did not want help with the physical parts. The physical parts she had been managing alone, and the managing of them alone was itself a form of holding on to something she needed to hold on to. When she was sitting upright, she said, "Tell me where things are." He straightened. The assembly began, the incremental construction of the version of himself that dealt with operational reality. But it was slower this morning and more deliberate, and she could see the seams of it in a way she hadn't always been able to before. "Dae-yoon is in a secure location," he said. He spent most of the night speaking to people who needed to hear what he knows about the Mercer Group structure. Substantive. It will move things significantly. He paused. His cooperation has been formally documented. It doesn't remove consequence. But it exists. Elias found him at 5:20 this morning. He was attempting to leave the city. A pause. He is no longer attempting to leave the city. Zariah absorbed that. She had told him she didn't want details, and he hadn't given her details. What he had given her was sufficient. "The evidence package," she said. The lawyer forwarded everything at 6 a.m. 4 recipients simultaneously. Federal contacts, 2 separate investigative journalists who have the expertise to understand what they're reading, and a legal advocacy organization that handles organized crime accountability cases. He looked at her. "It's out. Fully and irrevocably out. There's no version of today in which any of it comes back." Zariah let out a breath, the last held thing. The one she had been carrying since day 9, when she had first understood what she was building and what it would have to survive to matter. She felt it leave her body, like something physical, not dramatic, not a rush, just a quiet departure. The way tension leaves a muscle you haven't realized you've been clenching. "Tamsin's," she said, resting at a hotel near the Magnificent Mile. "One of my people is outside her door. She's asked to speak to you when you're ready." He paused. "She also asked me to tell you, and I'm quoting directly here, that you owe her a very expensive dinner and an extremely detailed explanation." Zariah closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there was something in her face that was not quite a smile, and not quite grief, some specific combination of the two that only exists when relief and guilt arrive at the same time. "She's right," she said quietly. "I do." She looked at her hands. The hospital bracelet on her wrist, white plastic, her name printed in black, the date of admission, the room number. She had looked at it every day for 11 days, without fully seeing it. Now she looked at it directly. She did not take it off. "Not yet. My mother has left Chicago," Jason said. Zariah looked at him. "She took a flight to Seoul at 5 a. She did not contact me before leaving." He said it evenly. Informational, but beneath the evenness was something she had learned to hear the particular frequency of pain that he did not perform and did not acknowledge and simply carried. "I've arranged for her accounts to be maintained. She has access to the house in Busan and the apartment in Seoul. She will not lack for anything material, but she's gone," Zariah said. "She's gone," he confirmed. Zariah was quiet for a moment. She thought about Yoonji Kwon, standing in the corner of this room last night, still, upright, wearing the weight of what she'd done without flinching, which was maybe the most accurate portrait of the woman she had ever been given. She thought about what Yoonji had said to her. You would have been something extraordinary in a different life. She had not answered it then. She answered it now, privately, to herself. This is my life. And I'm going to keep it. I'm sorry, she said to Jae-song. He looked at her. For what? For what it cost you. The part with your mother. She held his gaze. I'm not sorry the night happened the way it happened. But I'm sorry for that specific part of what it cost you. He was quiet for a moment. Then she made her choices. So did I. He said it, simply, without the texture of someone who has made peace with something, and without the texture of someone who is pretending to. Just the statement of a man sitting with a difficult truth and not asking it to be something else. Cost is the cost. She nodded. The morning light through the hospital window was stronger, now still gray, still October, but properly lit, the kind of light that shows you what is actually in the room rather than what you imagined was there in the dark. In it, Jae-seong looked tired in a way she had almost never seen him look tired. Not just sleeplessness, the deeper kind. The exhaustion that lives under a surface of a life, run at full tension for a very long time, finally, now that the immediate emergency had passed and the body understood, was allowed to feel what it had been deferring. When I leave this hospital, Zariah said, what does that look like? He understood the question. She wasn't asking about logistics. It looks like us sitting down, he said, together. With everything on the table. The organization, the transition, what I want it to become and what that requires, and where you fit into that, not where I put you, where you actually fit. He met her eyes. And then we figure out the rest from that conversation outward. That conversation is going to be long, she said. Yes. And hard, yes. And there are going to be parts of it where you want to stop and manage the situation, and I'm going to need you to not do that. I know, he said. And then, more quietly, I'm going to do that sometimes anyway. I don't want to promise something I know I'll fail at initially. I'll catch it when I do it, and I'll stop, but I'll do it. She looked at him for a long moment. It was, she thought, possibly the most honest sentence he had ever said to her. Not the promise of perfection, the acknowledgement of a specific and known limitation, and the commitment to work against it, which was the only kind of promise worth making, because it was the only kind that had the shape of an actual human being inside it, rather than a performance of one. Okay, she said. That's okay. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed something small. He set it on the bed beside her hand. She looked at it. A phone. Her phone from before the crash. She hadn't seen it since the accident. It was recovered from the car, he said. My people held it. I don't know if anything on it is salvageable. It went into the barrier and then into wet ground for 3 hours before recovery. But I thought you should have it back. She picked it up. The screen was cracked, the case dented on one corner in a way that showed the force of the impact. She turned it over in her hands. It was familiar and strange at the same time. The way objects from your life before a rupture always feel when you encounter them again, smaller than you remember, carrying a weight that has nothing to do with their physical mass. She set it down on the tray table beside the other phone. I need a shower, she said, and real food, and to call Tamsin myself. All of that is possible, he said, and I need you to go home and sleep for at least 6 hours before we start any conversations that matter. He looked at her. I'm not leaving you need to sleep, she said. Firmly, you're not useful to me exhausted. You're not useful to anyone. Go home, sleep, come back. I'm not going anywhere. My rib is not going anywhere. The conversations we need to have will still be waiting. He held her gaze for a moment, the familiar beat of a man's instinct, to resist being told what to do colliding with the recognition that the person telling him is right. She had seen that beat before. She had learned to wait it out without filling the silence. 6 hours, he said. Minimum. He stood, retrieved his jacket from the back of the chair. Put it on slowly, the movements of someone operating on reserve power. He looked at her. He seemed to want to say something and to be finding the specific words inadequate to whatever he was reaching for a not uncommon experience for people who spend most of their lives communicating silent through action and silence rather than language. "I'll be back," he said finally, which was not the thing he had been reaching for. But it was true, and it was said with the particular weight of a commitment rather than a statement, and she understood both versions of it. "I know," she said. He moved toward the door, stopped, without turning around, the highway. The night of the crash. I should have, he stopped again, tried once more. "I knew there was a threat. I didn't know it would move that fast." That's not an excuse. I know it's not an excuse. I just need you to know that if I had understood how fast." "Jay," she said. He stopped. "I know," she said quietly. "We'll talk about it. Properly. When you've slept." She held the back of his head with her eyes. He was still turned away, and she was speaking to the back of him, to the set of his shoulders, which told her as much as his face would have. "Go," he went. The door closed. The room settled into a different kind of quiet. The working quiet of a hospital morning, sounds through the walls, through the door, through the window. Ordinary. The quiet of a world that doesn't know what happened here last night and doesn't need to. Zariah sat in it for a while. Then she reached for the phone on the tray table. The working one. She dialed Tamsin's number and it rang twice. And then, "Zariah Monroe, you absolute." And then Tamsin's voice broke. And then Zariah's did too. And they sat like that for a moment. Both of them, not saying anything. Just the particular sound of two people who have been frightened on each other's behalf and are relieved past the capacity to immediately articulate it. "I'm sorry," Zariah said. "First thing, before anything else. No, I am. You didn't sign up for any of that. You helped me because I asked and I got you into something I didn't fully understand the reach of, and I'm sorry." Pause. "Then are you okay physically?" "Rib. Bruise. Tired. Intact. Is it over? Actually over?" "The worst of it is over," Zariah said. The rest of it she thought about the conversations waiting. The restructuring, the legal proceedings, the slow, careful work of figuring out what the next version of her marriage looked like. The rest of it is a different kind of work. Is he his Jae-song? He was here all night. He's gone home to sleep. She paused. "We're going to be okay, I think. I think we're going to be okay. But I'm not going to tell you it's simple. When has anything with you ever been simple?" Tamsin said. And it was a gentle thing, said with the warmth of someone who has known you long enough to have watched you navigate impossible things before, even when the impossibles were smaller. It landed the way it was meant to. "That expensive dinner," Zariah said. "Anywhere you want. Somewhere with a dress code," Tamsin said. "I want to get dressed up and eat something that costs too much and not talk about any of this for an entire evening." "Deal," Zariah said. After she hung up, she sat for a long time just holding the phone. Then she called Dr. Osi's extension and asked what the realistic timeline was for discharge, and listened to him tell her 3 to 5 more days, depending on how the rib was responding. And she said she understood, and she thanked him, and she set the phone down. 3 to 5 more days. She looked at the hospital bracelet on her wrist. She looked at the cracked phone Jae-song had left on the tray table. She looked at the window, where the gray October morning had settled into something almost ordinary. A normal day's light. The kind that falls on normal things and makes them visible without making them beautiful or terrible. Just visible. She reached up and took the hospital bracelet off. She did it slowly, pulling the clasp until the plastic gave, then laying it in her palm and looking at it. Her name, the date, the room number, evidence of what she had survived, in the most administrative and unsentimental form imaginable. She closed her hand around it. She didn't throw it away. She put it in the small drawer of the tray table, under the cracked phone. Somewhere she could find it later if she wanted it. Somewhere it wasn't gone, but also wasn't on her body, making every movement carry its weight. Then she lay back against the pillow and let the morning be quiet around her. She slept. She dreamed about the highway, not the crash, not the impact, but the moment just before it. The drive itself. The leftover jerk chicken she had been thinking about. The radio playing something she hadn't been paying attention to. The particular dark of the I-90 at midnight, the way the lights of other cars moved past in the opposite direction like slow-motion stars. She dreamed about it, the way you dream about the life that almost wasn't yours anymore, with the specific, unearned tenderness that only comes when you understand what you came close to losing. She woke at noon to a different quality of light. The room had been straightened while she slept. Fresh water, a meal tray she hadn't asked for, covered with a note from doctor. Osai that said eat something doctor's orders. She almost smiled at it. She ate. The food was hospital food, not the jerk chicken she had been thinking about on the highway. Not anything she would have chosen, but she ate all of it, methodically, because her body needed it, and she had spent the last 11 days making choices based on what her body needed rather than what she wanted, and she was not going to stop now. After she ate, she thought. She thought about the organization. About Jiang's words in the hours before dawn, the next 10 years versus the last 10 years. She thought about what it would mean to be inside that, rather than adjacent to it. The specific, practical shape of it. She had a mind that was good for this, not for the violence of it, not for the parts she would never want access to, but for the structure, the legitimate holdings, the businesses that were real and generated real revenue and employed real people and could, with sustained attention, be the foundation of something that didn't require a car going off a highway in the dark to defend itself. She thought about what she would need, not what Jae Seong would give her what she would need. Her own counsel, her own understanding of the legal territory, her own relationships with people who were not connected to the Kwan organization and who could therefore advise her without the bias of being inside it. She thought about the lawyer whose reputation made other lawyers uncomfortable, and about whether that particular relationship might become something more ongoing than emergency document custody. She made notes in her phone. Just notes, not plans. The beginning of the thinking that would eventually become plans. She was doing this absorbed in it, the way she got absorbed in problems she found genuinely worth solving when the door opened at 2:30 p. Em and Marcus walked in. She looked up. He was not someone she had expected to see here, in this room, in person. She had never met him in person. All their contact had been through intermediaries and one brief phone call on day 6. He was shorter than she had imagined him, with a broad, weathered face and the particular posture of a man who has spent a long time making himself unremarkable and has gotten very good at it. He stopped just inside the door. "I should have called first," he said. "It's all right," she said. "Sit down." He sat in the chair beside the bed, not perching, not performing ease, just sitting the way tired people sit when they're given permission to stop moving. He looked at the window for a moment, then at her. "I heard it went okay," he said. "Last night." "It went okay," she said. He nodded. Something moved through his expression, not relief, not quite, but something adjacent to it. The look of a man who has been carrying a specific weight for a specific period of time, and has just been told he can set it down. "Your daughter," Zariah said. "And your wife." He looked at her. "Are they all right?" she said. "Given that you—" She paused. "Given what you did. Are there going to be consequences for them?" He was quiet for a moment. "I've already taken care of relocating them," he said. "I had arrangements in place. I'm not naive about the kind of blowback something like this generates. Plan for it. Where will you go?" "Atlanta," he said. "My wife has family there. It was always the plan, eventually." This just moved the eventually up. He looked at his hands. "It's fine. It's actually," he stopped, seemed to reconsider the word he had been about to use. "The right thing. For all of us." Zariah looked at him steadily. "What you did," she said. "Those photographs. Coming to me the way you did." She held his gaze. "You didn't have to do that." "No," he agreed. "You did it anyway." He shrugged. The smallest possible shrug, not dismissive, just uncomfortable with being looked at directly for something that cost him something real. "I have a daughter," he said finally, 7 years old. "She's going to grow up, and she's going to run into men like Daeyeon Kwan eventually. Men who look at her and see something to manage or remove or use." He met Zariah's eyes. I wanted to have done at least one thing in my life that was worth pointing to when she asks me who I was. The room was very quiet. Zariah said, "She's lucky." He looked slightly away, nodded once. "If you ever need anything that's within my capacity to provide," she said, "I want you to reach out. Not through channels, directly." She reached to the tray table and wrote something on the notepad there, a number, not the hospital phone number, a personal number that very few people had, and she held it out to him. He took it, looked at it for a moment, folded it carefully, and put it in his shirt pocket. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you," she said. He stood, moved to the door, then stopped, the way Jae Seong had stopped this morning, with the door ahead of him and something unresolved behind him. "For what it's worth," he said, not turning around. "From where I was standing inside all of it, watching all of it, you were always the most dangerous person in any room you walked into." Never knew it. He walked out. The door closed. Zariah sat with that for a long time. The afternoon moved the way hospital afternoons move, slowly, in increments marked by the sounds of shift changes and the particular quality of late-day light through institutional windows. Dr. Osi came by at 4 p.m. and looked at the rib imaging and said things that were cautiously optimistic, and told her that if she continued to make the progress she was making, the low end of the discharge estimate was looking more realistic. She thanked him. She meant it. At 5 p.m., Jae Seong came back. He looked different. Not transformed. He was not a man who transformed. But he had slept, and the sleep had given him back some of what the sleeplessness had stripped, and he came through the door with more of his usual quality of presence. The particular gravitational field of him that she had noticed the first time she met him at a function 3 years ago, and had thought, at the time, was simply the effect of power on a room. She understood now it was something more specific than that. It was the effect of a person who is completely present in their own body and completely aware of where they are and who is in the room with them at all times. It was attention, sustained and total. Some people found it frightening. She had always found it in the context of being the person it was directed at, something else. He came in and sat in the chair beside the bed, the chair, not the edge of the mattress, and that was a small shift, a return to the appropriate architecture of the room, which felt right for this conversation. He had a paper bag with him. He set it on the tray table. She looked at it. "Jerk chicken," he said, "from the place on 47th. She looked at him. "You told me about it once," he said. 18 months ago. You said it was the best thing you'd eaten in Chicago, and you never had an excuse to go because it's not near anything we frequent." He paused. I remembered. She looked at the bag. She looked at him. Something moved through her that was too complicated to name, simply not sentimentality, though it had elements of that, not forgiveness, though it had elements of that too. Something that lived in the space between who a person is and who they are trying to become, and the specific emotion you feel when you see them actually trying. "You remembered," she said. "I remember most things you tell me," he said. "I'm not always good at demonstrating that, but I remember." She opened the bag. The smell was exactly what she had been imagining on the highway at midnight 11 days ago, and sitting in a hospital bed with a fractured rib and a bruise that was finally beginning to fade at its edges. She ate jerk chicken from a container, and Jae Seong sat beside her and had some too, and they did not talk about anything important for a while. It was the most normal 20 minutes of the last 11 days. Then they talked. Not about all of it, not in one conversation, not all at once, because the full conversation was the work of months and possibly years, and could not be completed in a hospital room on a Tuesday afternoon in October. But they started it. They actually started it, with the specific awkwardness and difficulty of beginning something that matters, without performing ease they didn't feel, without wrapping the difficulty in language that made it sound more resolved than it was. He told her about the months before the crash. In detail, the way she had asked him to not the edited version, not the version with the roughest parts, smoothed out in the name of not worrying her. The full version. The intelligence he had received about a potential internal threat. The reasons he had believed he could contain it without involving her. The specific moment he understood he had miscalculated, which was the phone call that told him she was in surgery. which was also the moment he understood that his belief in his own ability to manage the perimeter of their life had cost them something irreversible, or had almost cost them something irreversible. And that almost was going to live in him for a long time. She listened to all of it. She asked questions, not gentle ones. The questions of someone who has decided they need the actual information and is not going to accept the navigated version. He answered them. Then she told him about the 11 days. In full, because he had only had the reconstructed version, had understood the structure of what she had built, but not the texture of it, not what it had taken. Not the nights when the pain was bad, and the doubt was worse, and she had sat in the dark and asked herself whether she was building something real or just keeping busy to avoid the actual grief of what had happened to her. He listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not try to absorb her experience into something he could manage. He sat with it the way she had asked him, to sit with difficult things present, without solution, which was the hardest thing she had ever asked of him, and the thing he was worst at, and he did it. At one point, his jaw was very tight, and she understood that he was managing something internal, the specific fury of a man hearing the details of what his wife survived while he was elsewhere. The fury that had no useful object in this moment, because the crisis was over and the time to act had passed. She let him manage it. She didn't soften the telling to help him manage it. She just kept talking, and he kept listening, and by the time she was finished, they were both carrying something that was heavy and real, and finally shared rather than separately held. "You should have called me," he said, not an accusation. Just the flat, tired truth. "I know," she said. "I built everything as though you might be part of the problem. I didn't know. I couldn't rule it out." She held his gaze. "That's what your silence bought. Not protection. Doubt." He absorbed that. The particular way a absorbs something true that they wish weren't true fully, without looking away, without the self-protective reflex of argument. "I understand," he said. "I know you do," she said. "That's why I'm telling you." They were quiet for a while. Then he said the organization. "What I said this morning." He looked at her steadily. "I want to be clear that I'm not asking you to take something on out of obligation. I'm not offering you a role because it's a gesture or because I think it will resolve things between us. I'm asking you because you are the most capable person I know in a room full of capable people, and because the direction I want to move it requires someone I trust completely to be inside it." He paused. "And because I have spent 3 years having access to that and not using it, and that is one of the longer and more expensive mistakes I've made." She looked at him. She thought about the notes in her phone, the thinking she had already started. "I want my own counsel," she said. "Independent legal counsel, separate from the organization's attorneys. I won't operate without the ability to take independent advice." "Yes," he said. "I won't be a figurehead. If I'm inside something, I understand it fully, and I have actual input into its direction. Yes, and there will be parts of what the organization currently is that I won't be able to participate in. Parts I won't look at. We need to be clear about where those lines are, and they need to be respected." "I know," he said. "We'll define them. Together," she said. "Not by you deciding what I can handle. Together," he agreed. She nodded, slowly. The nod of someone who is not agreeing that everything is resolved, but who is agreeing that the structure of going forward is something she can work within. "Okay," she said. "Okay." Outside the window, October was becoming evening. The gray of the afternoon had deepened into the particular early dark of late autumn, when the light retreats before 6 p.m. and the city shifts into a different register, more interior, more lit from within, the restaurants and buildings pushing their warmth against the cold outside. Chicago in October has a specific smell that comes through even hospital windows if they're not fully sealed lake water and cold concrete and something burnt and something green, all of it together. The smells of a city that is genuinely indifferent to whether you are having a good day or a terrible one, and is going to smell exactly like itself either way. Zariah had always loved that about it, the indifference. Not the human indifference, which was just loneliness with better lighting. The city's indifference, the way Chicago simply was, completely and without apology, regardless of what any of its inhabitants were going through. It was 3 weeks later that she left the hospital. The discharge happened on a gray Thursday morning, quieter than she had expected. No ceremony, no significant moment, just doctor Osi signing the final paperwork, and a nurse removing the IV, and someone bringing a wheelchair that Zariah did not particularly want to use, but used anyway, because the hospital had a policy and she had learned that some battles were not worth having. Jae-sung was waiting in the hallway. He didn't say anything when she came through the door. He just fell into step beside her, the wheelchair moving at the pace of the orderly pushing it, and they went down in the elevator and through the lobby and out through the automatic doors into the October air. It hit her, the air, cold and particular and smelling exactly like itself. She breathed it in slowly, because her rib was still in its recovery arc, still requiring careful handling, but she breathed it in as fully as she could, and the pain was worth the fullness of it. She stood up from the wheelchair at the curb, steadied herself, felt the ground under her feet, the actual physical ground, for the first time in 3 weeks. Jae-seong's hand came up slightly, the reflex of a man who was about to offer support, and then stopped. Visibly stopped. He let his hand fall back. She looked at him. "You're doing it," she said. "You caught it." He looked slightly away, then back. "I'm trying," he said. "I know," she said. Car was at the curb. One of his people held the door. She got in on her own, sliding in carefully, and he went around and got in the other side, and the car pulled into traffic, and Chicago moved past the windows, the way it always does, constant and indifferent and entirely itself. They didn't go home, not right away. She had asked him, earlier in the week, to take a different route. A specific route. He had understood what she meant, without her saying it entirely. The car drove south and then east, onto the ramp that connected to the I-90. She watched the highway come up the familiar stretch of it, the particular configuration of lanes and lighting, and the guardrail running along the shoulder. She watched it without speaking. Her hands were in her lap. Her breathing was steady and controlled and cost her a small, consistent amount with every breath, and she paid that cost without comment. He was watching her without appearing to watch her stare. She knew this. She let him. It came to the section. She recognized it from the configuration of the trees and the mile marker and the specific bend in the road that had made it. She understood now, an ideal location for what had been done. Her car would have been visible from a certain distance. There would have been time to match speed and position before the move was made. Whoever was driving the other car that night had been patient and deliberate, and had known exactly what they were doing. "Stop here," she said. The driver pulled to the shoulder. Jae-seong said nothing. She looked at the guardrail. A section of it was newer than the rest. She could see it from here. The slightly different color, the unbent metal, the replacement that had happened in the aftermath of the crash. A practical repair. Infrastructure. Doing what infrastructure does, removing the evidence of rupture and restoring the surface to function. She reached into her coat pocket. The hospital bracelet was there. She had taken it from the tray table drawer the day before discharge and put it in her pocket without telling anyone why. She held it in her palm. She looked at the new section of guardrail. She looked at the highway, the ordinary traffic moving past in the opposite direction. She looked at the city in the distance, lit and present, and breathing its indifferent breath. She closed her hand around the bracelet. Then she opened the car door and stepped out onto the shoulder. The wind came at her immediately cold, direct, the specific bluntness of lake wind on an open highway. She stood in it without moving away from it. She let it hit her face and her hands and the open collar of her coat, and she stood in it, and she looked at where her car had gone through the barrier. She thought about the jerk chicken, about the radio, about the dark and the second car and the sound of metal. She thought about waking up. She thought about Marcus and his daughter and the photographs he had taken in secret. She thought about Tamsin on the phone at day 4, not asking questions, just helping. She thought about the lawyer whose reputation made other lawyers uncomfortable, sitting somewhere right now with a document trail that was already in the hands of people who knew what to do with it. She thought about Jae-seong behind the curtain. She thought about everything that had to happen for her to be standing on this shoulder, in this wind, with this bracelet in her hand, having survived not just the crash, but everything that came after it. She unclasped the bracelet, held it for a moment. Then she put it in her coat pocket. She didn't leave it there on the highway, didn't drop it through the guardrail, or release it into the wind. She kept it. That was a decision she had made in the night before discharge. Lying awake with the hospital quiet around her, she was going to keep it. Not as a wound, not as a reminder of what she'd lost or almost lost. As documentation, as the proof of a specific period of time in which she had been required to understand something about herself that she would not otherwise have learned. She was not interested in being defined by it, but she was not going to pretend it didn't happen. The wind pushed at her. She heard the car door open behind her. Jae-seong's footsteps on the shoulder gravel. He stopped beside her, not close enough to crowd, not far enough to perform distance. The correct distance. She noticed him calibrating it and was glad. They stood there for a moment. The traffic moved past on the highway. The city breathed in the distance. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the guardrail, the new section, with its unbent metal and its unremarkable surface. Then he looked at her. She reached out her hand. Not reaching for his, she extended it sideways, open, the way you extend a hand to someone you're walking with when the ground gets uneven and you are choosing to navigate it together rather than separately. He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. He took her hand. Not tightly, not with the particular grip of a man who is holding something he's afraid to lose. Just held it. Present. Equal. The way you hold the hand of someone who has already demonstrated, beyond any reasonable doubt, that they don't need to be held up and who you are holding hands with for a completely different reason than that. They stood at the side of the I-90 in the October wind and looked at the place where 11 days had begun. Then she turned and they walked back to the car. She got in on her side. He got in on his. The car pulled back into traffic and moved west, and then north, back towards the city, back towards the apartment they shared, and the conversation still waiting, and the work that was real and ongoing, and not Simps himself. She looked out the window as Chicago came toward them. She thought, I'm still here, not triumphantly, not in the dramatic, swelling music way as of someone who has arrived at the end of something and wants to mark the arrival. Just the flat, honest, true thought of a woman who had driven this highway thinking about leftover food and had ended up, through a series of choices and losses and reconstructions she could not have predicted, still here. Still in her life, still in her marriage, which was going to require everything she had for a very long time. Still in Chicago, which did not care and smelled like itself. Still with her hands and her mind and her attention, which had always been her most reliable assets, and which had, in the end, been enough. She reached into her coat pocket, felt the hospital bracelet there. Small, plastic. Her name in black on white, the date, the room number. She closed her fingers around it. The car moved through the city. The city moved around the car, and the morning went on ordinary and indifferent, and lit from within the way morning always does, for people who have made it through the night.